Becky had spent most of his life feeling like he didn't belong in his own home. In the small house in Johannesburg, there was always enough love for Neo, but never enough patience for him. Every mistake Cairo made became a problem. Every meal he ate became an expense. Every dream he talked about became a joke. His father, Becky, never missed a chance to remind him, "You cost too much. You'll never survive alone. You're a burden." The words came so often that Cairo stopped defending himself. He would just lower his eyes and stay quiet while his stepmother Evelyn shook her head in disappointment from across the dinner table. Meanwhile, Neo lived like a prince. New sneakers every month, expensive birthday parties, late-night takeout whenever he wanted. If Neo failed at something, the family comforted him. But when Cairo struggled, they treated him like a problem that ruined the mood in the house. Sometimes Cairo would stand outside his bedroom door at night and hear them laughing together in the living room without him. It felt like listening to a family he was never truly part of. Still, he tried. He washed dishes before anyone asked, took extra shifts after school, fixed broken things around the house. But no matter what he did, it was never enough for Themba. One night, after Cairo quietly asked if he could borrow money for college applications, his father looked at him with cold eyes and said, "You keep taking and taking. What do you actually give back?" That question stayed inside Cairo longer than anyone realized. The night everything broke started with unpaid bills spread across the kitchen table. Themba sat there rubbing his forehead while Evelyn angrily flipped through envelopes one after another. Electricity warning, mortgage notice, credit card debt. The whole house felt heavy with stress. Neo was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone like none of it mattered. Cairo quietly walked into the kitchen after finishing a long shift at work. The moment Evelyn saw him, her expression changed instantly. "There he is," she snapped. Cairo froze. Themba didn't even look up. Evelyn slammed one of the bills onto the table. "Do you see this? We can barely breathe in this house anymore." Cairo softly said, "I'm helping where I can." But that only made her angrier. "Helping?" she shouted. "You eat here, sleep here, use electricity here, and for what? You're draining this house." The words hit hard. Neo laughed quietly under his breath from the couch, making it even worse. Cairo looked at his father, hoping for once he would defend him. But Themba slowly leaned back in his chair and said the one thing Cairo never forgot. "She's right." The room went silent. "You're old enough now," Themba continued coldly. "And honestly, all you do is bring more pressure into this house." Cairo felt his chest tighten. "Dad." But Evelyn was already storming toward his room. A few seconds later, she came back dragging his old duffel bag across the floor. Then another one. Clothes were half falling out as she threw them near the front door. "Cairo, please," he whispered, embarrassed as neighbors outside started noticing the shouting. Evelyn pointed toward the door. "Get out." His heart dropped. Themba finally stood up, walked over calmly, and held out his hand. "Keys." Cairo stared at him in disbelief. "This is still my home," he said quietly. Themba's face hardened. "Not anymore." With shaking hands, Cairo removed the house key from his pocket and placed it in his father's hand. For a second nobody moved. Then Themba opened the front door, pushed the bags outside, and looked directly at his son. "You'll never survive out there," he said coldly. And then the door slammed shut in Cairo's face. Just like that, he was homeless. Cairo stood in the driveway for a long time after the door slammed shut. For a few seconds, he honestly thought his father would open it again. Maybe this was just anger. Maybe Themba would calm down and tell him to come back inside. But the lights inside the house stayed on while he stood outside in the dark like a stranger. Then the rain started. First it was light, small drops hitting the pavement. But within minutes, heavy rain poured down over Johannesburg, soaking his clothes, his shoes, even the duffel bags lying beside him. Cairo wiped his face quickly, pretending the water in his eyes was only rain. Through the front window, he could still see Neo sitting on the couch laughing at something on his phone. Evelyn walked past without even looking toward the door. Nobody came outside. Nobody cared. Cairo slowly picked up his bags with trembling hands. One of them ripped slightly at the bottom, and some of his clothes fell onto the wet driveway. He bent down quietly to pick them up before the neighbors could see. That humiliation hurt more than the cold. Just as he started walking toward the gate, the front door suddenly opened behind him. For one stupid second, hope hit his chest. Maybe his father changed his mind. Maybe he realized he went too far. But Themba only stood there with a hard expression on his face. Rain poured around him as he looked directly at his son and said, "The world doesn't reward dead weight." The sentence hit harder than anything else that night. Cairo felt completely frozen. Dead weight. That's really how his own father saw him. Not as his son. Not as family. Just something heavy to carry. Cairo wanted to say something back. He wanted to scream, to ask why his father hated him so much. But the words never came out. Because deep down, he already knew nobody inside that house was going to choose him. So he just nodded quietly. Then he turned around and started walking down the street alone in the rain. No car. No money. No place to go. Every step felt heavier than the last. Cars passed by splashing water onto the road beside him while he carried everything he owned in 2 soaked bags. That night, Cairo lost more than his home. He lost the last bit of belief that his family would ever love him. The first year after Cairo got thrown out was brutal. Some nights he slept in tiny rented rooms that smelled like damp walls and old cigarettes. Other nights he stayed in cheap hostels where strangers argued through thin walls until morning. He learned very quickly that being broke meant nobody cared whether you were tired, hungry, or hurting. At one point, he lived in a room so small that his mattress touched both walls. When it rained, water leaked through the ceiling into a bucket beside his bed. But even then, Cairo kept telling himself one thing every morning. Just survive today. He worked wherever he could. Morning warehouse shifts, night security jobs, cleaning offices after midnight. Sometimes he worked so many hours that he fell asleep on buses and missed his stops. His hands became rough. His eyes constantly looked exhausted. But slowly, he stopped looking like the weak boy his father talked about. What hurt most was the silence from home. No calls, no messages, no birthdays, not even a simple "Are you alive?" At first, Cairo checked his phone every night hoping his father would finally reach out. Maybe apologize, maybe ask him to come home. But the calls never came. After a while he stopped checking. One evening during a security shift at a luxury apartment building, Cairo started talking to one of the property managers. The man explained how rental units worked, how buildings made money, how investors bought damaged properties cheap and sold them later for profit. For the first time in years, something inside Cairo lit up. He started spending his breaks watching real estate videos online, reading property blogs, studying contracts and management systems at public libraries because he couldn't afford courses. While everyone else slept, Cairo learned. Little by little, he started saving money. Not much at first. Just enough to buy tiny opportunities other people ignored. A broken apartment unit. An old property needing repairs. A small rental space nobody wanted. He cleaned them himself, painted walls himself, fixed leaks himself. There were days he barely ate so he could keep investing. But slowly, things started changing. Not fast enough for anyone to notice. But enough for Cairo to realize something important. The same world his father said would destroy him was quietly making him stronger. Years passed, and Cairo's life slowly turned into something nobody from his old home would ever imagine. He didn't become loud about his success. No flashy posts, no showing off cars or money. He stayed quiet, almost invisible, like he was still the same boy who once got kicked out in the rain. But behind that quiet life, everything had changed. With years of learning, small risky investments, and sleepless nights, Cairo finally built something real. He partnered with Malik Sar, someone who understood his vision, and together they started a luxury housing company in Johannesburg. At first it was just a few properties. Old buildings they renovated and turned into modern apartments. Then it became more serious. High-end housing projects, gated communities, investment deals that started getting attention from big names. But even after all that success, Cairo never lived like a rich man. He still wore simple clothes. He still drove a normal car. He still lived in a quiet apartment away from attention. People who met him in business often had no idea he was one of the fastest-growing property investors in the city. To him, success was not about showing off. It was about never going back to that helpless feeling again. Meanwhile, back in his old family home, things were very different. Themba still believed Cairo was struggling somewhere, barely surviving like he had predicted. Evelyn sometimes even used him as an example of what happens when life doesn't work out. Neo laughed whenever his name came up, calling him a failure who disappeared. They had no idea the truth was the complete opposite. Cairo was not surviving, he was building. And quietly, without telling anyone, his company started working on some of the same areas where his old family lived. Luxury developments, rental properties, investment buildings, all slowly expanding across the city. Still, Cairo never reached out, not once. Because for him, success wasn't about proving them wrong loudly. It was about making sure they could never decide his worth again. For years, Themba Mbeki believed he had built a stable life. A good house, a growing business, respect in his circle. He always told himself he had done everything right, and that people like Cairo were just extra weight slowing life down. But slowly, that perfect life started to fall apart. First, it was small problems. Delayed payment here. A lost client there. Nothing that seemed dangerous. But then the debt started stacking up. Bills that used to be manageable suddenly became impossible to control. Interest kept growing, and the pressure started sitting heavily on Themba's shoulders every single day. He stopped sleeping properly. He started taking calls late at night, trying to fix deals that kept falling through. The same confidence he once had slowly disappeared, replaced with stress and panic he didn't know how to hide. Evelyn tried to act strong in the beginning, but even she started breaking down when notices from the bank arrived. Mortgage warnings. Final reminders. Then the worst one, talk of asset seizure if payments weren't made. The house that once felt powerful now felt like it was slowly slipping away from them. Neo, who was always treated like the golden child, turned out to be completely unprepared for real responsibility. Instead of helping, he started making worse decisions. Expensive spending even during financial stress. Bad investments. Ignoring warnings. Acting like nothing serious was happening. That made everything collapse even faster. One evening, Themba came home to find lawyers' documents on the table. His business accounts were frozen. Several properties were already under legal review. The reality hit him all at once. He was losing everything he built. Evelyn panicked, going from room to room, calling people who stopped answering. Friends who once respected Themba suddenly became busy. No one wanted to get involved in his problems anymore. For the first time, the Mbeki household felt real fear. Not anger. Not pride. Just fear. Neo finally admitted he didn't know what to do. His confidence disappeared overnight. The same family that once looked down on Cairo was now falling apart in ways they never expected. And in the middle of all this chaos, Themba kept thinking about one thing he never said out loud, but couldn't escape anymore. The boy he called a burden was the only one who ever left quietly and survived on his own. Now, for the first time, Themba's world didn't feel strong anymore. It felt empty and collapsing. The situation in the Mbeki household had reached a point where pride no longer mattered. Only survival did. After weeks of stress, calls from banks, and constant pressure from debt collectors, Themba finally had no choice but to look for something cheaper. Something they could actually afford. The idea of losing their current lifestyle was already painful, but losing the house completely was worse. That's how they ended up driving through Johannesburg, silently, to view a more affordable luxury rental. Nobody in the car was in a good mood. Themba kept his eyes on the road, tense and quiet. Evelyn sat in the back scrolling through her phone, trying to hide her worry. Neo just stared out of the window, pretending he didn't understand how serious things had become. When they arrived, the place looked nothing like affordable. It was a modern gated property, with clean white walls, glass balconies, and a wide driveway that looked like something from a magazine. The garden was perfectly maintained. The security was high-end. Everything about it screamed wealth. Even Evelyn leaned forward a little, surprised. "This is rental?" she asked softly, almost impressed. The agent smiled politely and opened the gate for them. "Yes, ma'am. Fully managed luxury units. Very secure. Very private." As they walked inside, the house felt even more expensive than outside. Large open spaces. High ceilings. Natural light everywhere. The kind of home people don't just live in, they show off. For a moment, even Themba forgot his stress. He looked around like maybe, just maybe, this could still be saved. Evelyn was already imagining furniture placements. Neo walked around like he belonged there, nodding as if he approved. The agent led them to the dining area and placed a thick file on the table. "Everything is ready for lease signing," he said. Then he opened the document. Everyone leaned in slightly. And that was the moment the room changed. The agent pointed at the top line casually and said, "The property owner is Cairo Mbeki." Silence. Not confusion. Not surprise. Pure heavy silence. Evelyn froze mid-breath. Neo stopped moving completely. Themba's face went completely still, like his mind refused to accept what he just heard. For a few seconds nobody spoke. Even the air felt different. The same name they had ignored for years. The same son they had thrown out like he meant nothing. Now written at the top of a luxury property lease. By Cairo Mbeki. For a few seconds after the name was read, nobody in the room moved. It felt like the air had completely stopped. Then Themba slowly looked around the house again, but this time everything felt different. The same modern walls, the same luxury space. Suddenly didn't feel like a rental anymore. It felt like a trap he had walked into without realizing. His hands tightened slightly. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. Evelyn stood frozen near the table. Her mouth opened like she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. She kept looking at the document, then at the house, then back again like she was hoping the name would change if she looked hard enough. Neo, who always acted confident, suddenly couldn't even lift his head. His face turned red with embarrassment. He took a small step back, as if standing too close to the truth was uncomfortable. And then footsteps, slow and calm, from the hallway. Everyone turned. Cairo walked in. No dramatic entrance. No guards. No loud announcement. Just him. Dressed simply, clean, professional. No anger on his face. No sign of revenge. Just quiet control, like this was a normal day for him. The same boy they once threw out in the rain was now standing in front of them in a house they could no longer afford without him. Themba stared at him, completely still. It was like his brain was trying to match the memory of a broken, unwanted son with the man standing in front of him now. "Cairo," Evelyn finally whispered, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to say his name anymore. But Cairo didn't react emotionally. He just looked at the file on the table, then back at them. "Good afternoon," he said politely, in a calm professional tone. "I see you've reviewed the property." No anger in his voice. No bitterness. Just distance. That calmness hit harder than shouting ever could. Because if he had been angry, they could have argued back. If he had screamed, they could have defended themselves. But he wasn't giving them anything to fight. He was treating them like clients. Not family. Themba swallowed hard, trying to speak, but his voice didn't come out properly at first. Neo shifted uncomfortably, staring at the floor, realizing this wasn't just success. This was a complete power shift. Cairo walked slowly to the table and placed his hand on the lease file. "Shall we continue?" he asked calmly. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood something painful. The boy they once called a burden was now the only reason they were even standing inside that house. The room felt heavier than before as the lease agreement was placed on the table. This was the moment Themba never imagined in his life. His hands hovered above the papers for a few seconds, unsure, almost refusing to accept what was happening. The same hand that once pushed his son out of his house was now shaking while holding paperwork for that same son's property. Evelyn stood behind him, silent and pale. Neo kept looking away, pretending he didn't understand the seriousness of it, but his discomfort was obvious. Nobody was talking now. Even the air felt too tight. Themba slowly sat down. For the first time in his life, he didn't look like a strong businessman or a strict father. He just looked tired. broken in a way he didn't know how to hide. The pen touched the paper. He paused. Just for a second, his eyes briefly moved up and met Cairo's. But Cairo wasn't angry. He wasn't smiling either. He just stood there calmly, watching like a professional landlord observing a client. That silence made everything worse. Finally Themba signed, one line, then another. Each stroke of the pen felt heavier, like he was signing away his pride more than just a lease. When he finished, he slowly pushed the paper forward, his hand still slightly trembling. Evelyn let out a small breath like she had been holding it for hours. Neo shifted uncomfortably again, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Cairo stepped forward and picked up the document. He checked it carefully, then nodded once. "Good," he said quietly. Then he looked at Themba and added in a calm voice, almost casually, "Careful with Clause 7. Late payments matter." The words landed like a silent strike. Themba froze slightly, because he understood exactly what that meant. No excuses, no favoritism, no power, just rules. Cairo placed the file down and looked at all of them for a moment. Not emotional, not angry, just controlled. Then he said something softer, almost like a reminder from the past, but without warmth. "The world doesn't reward dead weight." This time no one argued, no one laughed, no one could even breathe properly. Because the man who once said that sentence to a helpless boy was now sitting in that same boy's property, signing papers just to stay inside it. And for the first time, Themba realized something painful. This wasn't revenge. This was reality finally catching up. The silence after the lease signing didn't end when the pen was put down, followed everyone like a shadow. Later that evening, when the documents were done and the tension had no more place to hide, Themba finally tried to speak. His voice was low, tired, almost broken. For the first time in years, he didn't sound like a strong father or businessman. "Cairo," he started, then stopped. He swallowed hard. I think I was wrong." The words came out slowly, like they hurt to say. Evelyn looked down. Neo stayed quiet, frozen in guilt and embarrassment. Cairo didn't react immediately. He just looked at them for a moment, like he had waited years to hear that sentence. But now it didn't carry the same meaning anymore. Then he spoke calmly. "You threw me away because I needed help." The room felt smaller. Cairo continued, his voice steady but heavy. "Now you need mine. No anger, no shouting, just truth." That was worse in a way, because there was no emotion left to argue with. After a long silence, Cairo made his decision. He allowed them to stay in the property, but only under strict lease conditions. No shortcuts, no privileges. Everything documented, everything controlled. Respect was no longer automatic, it had to be earned. And emotionally, nothing went back to how it was. The family that once broke him would now live under his rules, but not under his heart. That night, Cairo stood alone on the balcony of his penthouse. The city lights of Johannesburg spread out in front of him, quiet and endless. He didn't feel loud victory. He didn't smile. Just peace. His phone vibrated. A message from Themba. "I was wrong." Cairo looked at it for a moment. "Read it." And didn't reply. He simply locked his phone and turned back to the city. Because some apologies don't fix the past. And some lessons are learned too late. "The man who called me a burden, signed paperwork begging to live under my roof."